the Supreme Court is generally reluctant to overturn interpretations that have been accepted for many decades or centuries. And that means anyone who understands how the court operates knew this was always going to be an uphill battle. Even Trump said he didn't think he was going to win. Okay, and what the red side was trying to do, all right. Let me see what I guess what many people who are pro changing or conservatives or whatever you want to call them, pro Republicans, they're they're upset about the outcome. Okay, we lost. Okay, or they lost. But it's the fact that several justices were willing to, I would say, seriously consider the arguments. They entertained it in the first place, that challenged the traditional understanding of the 14th Amendment citizenship clause. Not because, see, here's the thing. Not long ago, many believed that those arguments would be dismissed overnight. It would have been 9-0 ruling. And the thinking is that this major constitutional change usually is going to happen over time, like it normally does. And so, you have legal scholars, you have judges, and they begin to take those arguments more seriously. And eventually, the composition of the Supreme Court is going to change, and that's key. And that's exactly how the law surrounding the Second Amendment evolved over time. And many conservatives believe that the same process is now taking place with birthright citizenship. So it's going to take time. And so their message, I guess the conservatives, their message isn't that, hey, we didn't win today, but we moved the ball downfield because they made a little headway. They believe this decision shows that the legal debate has shifted enough that the future Supreme Court appointments, the court could one day adopt a narrower interpretation of the 14th Amendment than the one that they have right now. And whether you agree with the prediction or not, that's the point that I'm making. Okay, what I'm saying is today's decision or yesterday's decision wasn't an end fight. It was evidence that the fight is moving in the direction that I believe will eventually lead to a different constitutional interpretation. Now, let me put my own little lawyer hat in this for a minute, because I want to separate politics from law. A lot of people are reaching this emotion, are reacting to emotionally to this case, but as an attorney, I think it's more important to understand what the legal arguments actually were and how strong they really were. First, I've heard people say that the Supreme Court rule it was 6-3. Okay, that's it. But if you really start looking at it, it was a 5-4 split, in my opinion. Because let me say it like this, because of some of the writing. All right, just some of the writing. And as lawyers, we don't rely on the headlines; we rely on the actual language of the court. Shout out to my man Fuquan. Now, second, there's no question that the traditional understanding of the 14th Amendment for well over a century has been virtually everyone born on American soil is a U.S. citizen, with only a few exceptions, such as children of foreign diplomats. And, there used to be Native Americans, but that's not what it is now. They actually came up with a law. Now, the Supreme Court relied on a case called United States versus Wong Kim Ark. And for generations, that case has been understood to recognize birthright citizenship for nearly everyone born in the United States. Now, here's where the legal debate becomes very interesting. Over the last several decades, you have had a number of constitutional scholars have challenged that traditional interpretation. Okay. And they've argued about the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof and how it should be interpreted more narrowly than the courts have historically interpreted. Shout out to Deisha Brown. Thank you so much. On the other hand, you have a lot of constitutional scholars who continue to argue that Wong Kim Ark correctly interprets the citizenship clause. So, understand that this isn't a debate between people who know the law and who don't. Okay, this is a genuine constitutional debate You have, very serious legal scholars on both sides. And this also helps explain Clarence Thomas's position. Now, if you read Justice Thomas's writings over the years, and I know most of you all have never read anything that the man wrote, you don't know anything about him, you just know you told that he was a sellout. Okay. But what I want you to understand is you'll notice a consistent theme. He believes constitutional provisions should be interpreted according to the original public meaning and historical context. And when discussing birthright citizenship, Justice Thomas repeatedly emphasized the history surrounding the adoption of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War and its purpose of securing citizenship for Black people who were formerly enslaved. And whether the original historical purpose ultimately limits the scope of citizenship clause is precisely the constitutional question on which the judges and the scholars are continue to disagree. Now, I've also heard people say that the Supreme Court is only one justice away from changing birthright citizenship. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Okay. The truth is, nobody knows because once these people get elected, you don't really know what they're going to do. Okay. Now, the future Supreme Court decisions depend on the facts of the case, the arguments presented, the procedural posture, and how the justice analyze the issues. And judicial philosophy, it can give us clues, but it doesn't always predict who votes how and when and why. And here's my overall assessment. Historically speaking, the background is most accurate. The explanation of how constitutional precedent develops over time is generally accurate. And where I think people get ahead of themselves is when they start predicting inevitable outcomes. So could a future Supreme Court reinterpret the citizenship clause more narrowly? It can happen. Yeah. Is it guaranteed? No. That's a prediction. It's a political legal forecast. Okay. Not an established fact. The biggest lesson I want you all to take away from this discussion is that constitutional law evolves. In other words, I'm trying to give y'all hope. Somebody type hope in the chat room. You all who are disappointed that we're about to get flooded with a bunch of anchor babies, I'm trying to give you hope. Okay. All right. And sometimes it evolves when you talk about constitutional law because of new historical scholarship. Sometimes new arguments gain traction. Sometimes it evolves because the composition of the Supreme Court changes, and that's exactly why these debates matter. Okay, so as lawyers, our job is to distinguish between what the law is today, and what some people believe the law should become tomorrow, and what remains, nothing more than informed speculation. Now, let me explain why so many people are looking at the Supreme Court decision differently. Shout out to Fuquan. Okay, again, we lost. Pretty obvious. Okay, but when you look at how people voted, all right, again, the majority consisted of Chief Justice Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. The dissenters, Justice Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch. So you had a 6-3 decision. But again, Kavanaugh was interesting. He kind of gave us some leeway. So it feels like a 5-4 to me, but it was 6-3 on the books. Okay. But let me run this down to you. So I think we're closer than ever, right? If that's your goal, and because it has everything to do with where they believe, or where I believe the law is heading. 20 years ago, few people believed the Supreme Court justices would seriously entertain some arguments about the 14th Amendment, and today you got a 3-6 split. So it's going in the right direction. Okay. Now, whether the argument ultimately prevails is another question. Nobody knows what the future Supreme Court will do. Nobody knows who the justices will be or who they will vote for. But, it's going to come up again. That's inevitable. So if you're asking me what I think the best takeaway is this: don't confuse today's outcome with the end of the constitutional debate, because things are going to change. The minute we start going from 250,000 anchor babies dropped off every year in the United States to 1 million, y'all are going to put pressure on everybody.